So thank you so much for joining us, and a very warm welcome to our first virtual hiring webinar. We will just take a few run-throughs in terms of why the webinars actually originated. We have got 6 in the series, and it all started by these topics being conversations that I seem to be having daily with clients. So this particular one is obviously on trend at the moment because of what's happened with COVID, and many businesses have been forced to start remote hiring or interview processes very quickly, and adapting to that almost instantly as of March time. So today we'll be focusing on virtual hiring, including the interview process and onboarding process. And we'll be looking at ways that you can create strategy around that if that's not already in place, how to run with virtual interviews, but also what is included in a virtual onboarding process. So I'm really pleased to have joining me today, Sharon Jones and Millie Muncey, both from GRC. Ladies, thank you for joining us. Great to have you with us. And Sharon, if we wouldn't mind just starting with you, would you be able to give us an overview of your role and what GRC do?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you, Hayley. Really pleased to join you today. And I hope that everyone who's participating at least enjoys Millie and I sharing what we do, and is maybe able to take something away from it. So I'm Head of Group Talent and HR for GRC International Group. So I look after the HR at a strategic and operational level within the group, which spans 8 group companies, which are UK and internationally based. So we have a very diverse workforce in terms of location, so various things that we need to be up to date with and think of as an HR team. So I joined IT governance when it was just IT governance before it came a group 6 years ago today. So it's a nice little milestone for me. And I have to say, over the 6 years that I've been part of the company, I have seen so much growth and change. We're an organisation which are constantly changing and developing. We're very ambitious in terms of how we operate and what we do, and we're always looking for opportunities for us to grow and change that meets the demands of our market, making sure that we put in our customers and their needs at the forefront of how we do and how we operate, but obviously very much within the structure of the principles that we share with our clients and customers in terms of frameworks and policies and procedures, which is all about obviously building compliance and building in that need for continuous improvement and change to make sure organisations can adapt successfully. For us, we have, like I say, gone through quite a bit of change, and one of our significant milestones was in 2018 when we became a listed company, which was a really amazing time for us. It really kind of set us on our path as a group of companies working together towards a common goal. Around that time, we were also going through a massive growth phase. So this was very much linked with the GDPR requirement and supporting businesses to help them become compliant in light of that going live. And as an organisation, we saw this as an amazing opportunity for us to grow and develop our products and services, which in turn meant that our workforce needed to grow and develop along with that. And we actually tripled our headcount in about 18 months. So for us, we are well versed in terms of recruiting and onboarding. It took to one point 20 people we were onboarding a month. So we were very much thinking about how can we work effectively, how can we deal with change, how can we make sure we're selecting the right people, we're using the right tools, and we're using the right processes and methods and strategies to bring people on board so they have the best start with us. So again, very much thinking about how change and continuous improvement help support you in a period when you're going through a considerable period of change. We also, as I mentioned about, very much thinking about our clients and our customers and our markets, so very much tying that improvement in with what's going on externally as well as internally. And that's meant as an HR team, we've also become very agile, very resilient. And I think it's very important that organisations, they build the resilience. They have teams that understand what that means and use that as kind of part of how they operate. And I think you know, I very much keep that at the heart of how we work as an HR team in terms of supporting the business, very much looking at that continual improvement and that change, and not being afraid of that as well. I think that's really important. Even, you know, when that change doesn't necessarily feel great, it is important to keep at heart of what you're trying to achieve and actually being as positive as you can about that change.
Absolutely.
In terms of what we do as a company, I think everybody is aware, they see in the news about cybercrime, about, you know, companies, how they manage data breaches, companies being hacked, people out there that are just trying to take advantage of, you know, extracting people's details, using them for, you know, personal gain, for, you know, crime, etc. And as a group of companies, we pretty much do everything from a toolkit, pocket guide, through to a full-on consultancy service that can help support businesses to build their resilience and strengthen themselves in terms of their processes, procedures, understanding their vulnerabilities and how they can improve what they do to actually make them more resilient to things like cybercrime, and making sure that they keep their information secure. So obviously our company is built around the belief that information security is a business issue. It's not just an IT one, and we're driven to help our customers find the appropriate solution for them in terms of obviously budget and their requirements. And very much our mission is to engage with businesses. Our clients, like I say, are very much at the forefront of what we do, and what they need is really important to us. And we have these three kind of key words that we use in terms of summing up for us, and when we log on in the morning, they're always there on the screen as the first thing we see, and it's protect. So it's about saying protect and secure your intellectual property. What you hold dear as an organization is really important. You need to protect that. Comply with the relevant regulations, so things like the general data protection regulations. That is really important, because otherwise an organisation is really opening itself up to extra costs that, you know, in particularly a time like this, that they can't necessarily afford. And by doing that, helping a company to thrive, so basically saying by doing things like this, keeping these important principles about your information secure, complying, you can then thrive as an organisation to meet your strategic goals by managing your information and your data better, but also helping your employees understand that they play a big part in that too. So we obviously do that through multiple locations, obviously here locally, in Europe and the USA. We work very remotely, obviously, with our employees, and very much more so, actually, obviously, since everything's happened with COVID. So we've, as an organisation, very much learn how to be remote, be more virtualized as a business, which I think has definitely helped us stand us in a good stead for actually dealing with obviously the current situation. So how we support businesses through things like consultancy and training services, again, another area that we've needed to adapt recently, so very much come more virtualized. So we have training courses that are delivered online. We do a lot of our consultancy services at the moment, very much over on video calls, very much more virtually. Obviously, you know, we'll get to a point where we'll probably go back to kind of some more on-site activity, but very much we're very aware of the need of that virtual presence and making that work for us as a business. Also things like penetration testing, so that's where we'll have consultants that will test people's infrastructure. Again, something else that was very much more localized. Now again, we've looked at it in sort of a virtual sense, so again, that virtualization. Other things like I've touched on, books, e-learning, very much e-learning, again, a really important thing for businesses to take into consideration. We'll obviously discuss that more as part of kind of the onboarding process. Again, with also services, we have a software part of our business. So again, providing companies with software that can help them understand how to comply. And then our law side of things, where we've got legal advice and support services like DPO as a service, also helping people, support them with things like DSARs as well. So a real mix of things that we do right across the board in terms of supporting businesses, but also I think this helps to demonstrate that as a business we've very much seen the challenges of virtualization and actually worked and overcome those and made those work for us. So I think, you know, for us it's very much, you know, our customers at the forefront, very much our protect, comply and thrive is helping organisations become resilient. But I think also we've learned as a business that that resilience and that change works, and we've used those principles for ourselves, and I think as an HR team that's made us very agile and resilient to change. And I hope that some of the things that we talk about today will help others gain some of that resilience and not be afraid of that change that they have to deal with.
Absolutely, Sharon, thank you. That is a great insight there. Over to you, Millie. So recruitment manager. So would you mind just describing to us about your role, the number of vacancies that you recruit, the type of roles that they are? If you could give us a bit of a summary, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, of course. So following on from Sharon, so I work with Sharon in the HR team. I've been with GRCI for just over 3 years now. Over that time, my role has developed. I solely used to look after recruitment, and now I've moved into kind of more of a hybrid role where I look after all of the recruitment for the group and all the group companies, and then secondly support Sharon in terms of the more general HR, which obviously includes the onboarding process as well. In terms of kind of the number of vacancies I've recruited for, I think based on leading on from what Sharon said about period and growth in 2018, there's far too many to count in my time at GRCI. But we've been continuing to recruit for key roles during sort of the lockdown period. We currently have a live role. We've got 2 sort of going through the approval process at the moment, and 1 that we recently filled for a new employee within the EU marketing team. So we actually onboarded them last week. So that went really well. Touching upon then that the types of vacancies, obviously due to the size and nature of the group, it varies quite considerably in terms of what I get to recruit for. So currently it's technical role. We're looking obviously new marketing positions and e-learning positions to support the group in its current phase. So a little bit then about kind of the interview process for us. So as Sharon said, obviously we adapt and we're quite an agile HR team. So a part of our interview process has always had an element of virtualization due to the group locations. So obviously we recruit in the US and the EU, and it's not always viable for us to pop across to the US to conduct some interviews, as lovely as that would be. So Microsoft Teams and Skype has always played kind of a key part in the process. So we've now moved that to obviously having the interview process at the moment fully online, and the onboarding process as well. And we've adapted kind of existing processes to what we need at the moment. Just making sure that obviously new starters and potential employees kind of still get that really warm welcome into the group, and the same opportunities and things if we were doing it face to face. So I know obviously we'll then cover this in a bit more detail sort of throughout the webinar.
Absolutely, that is great, Millie, and as you rightly said, onboarding is such an important part, whether it's done face to face or virtually at this time. Yeah. So I just wondered if we could start with some questions just generally about how things have changed for you since lockdown. I know you mentioned about the onboarding process now being moved to being virtual. Is there anything specific that's dramatically changed for you in terms of your approach to that?
I wouldn't say anything's kind of dramatically changed. It's been adapted in terms of the process that we had in place to be able to deliver it effectively from home. So things obviously that have changed for us is there's such things as kind of the right to work checks in line with the government guidelines on the UK government website, being able to update those in doing them via what we use is Microsoft Teams. So we've been doing those as part of the HR induction, is the employee being able to show us their passport and us sort of following that process, still being able to log the information. So it's just adapting those. moving to obviously Microsoft Teams and making sure that we do the video calls, because that's really important. It's all well and good kind of having a verbal conversation with someone, but it's so much better when you can see them, and adapting that so they can actually meet their new colleagues face to face, and things like that. So we also have implemented, obviously, that we're dispatching kit now, because people can't come into the office to collect sort of new laptops or screens and things like that. So it's looking at that process of sending it out to them, making sure that it's all tracked, so we can then follow up with them and kind of give them a call ahead of their start with us to make sure that that's all been received. So I wouldn't say, like I said, anything's dramatically changed, just sort of an adaptation of what we had previously.
Perfect. And as you said, recruitment has continued, which is fantastic news. And I will say, from my point of view, I think there's definitely been never such a tiny move in the market over the last week in terms of the number of inquiries and vacancies that we've been getting. So this is a very encouraging sign. So yeah, do you want to tell me a bit about how the recruitment has continued? And I know you mentioned about the success that you had last week with your placement there.
Yeah, so it's continued just in the sense of kind of looking at obviously what we would do, the key roles that we need in a business, what's the business requirement, to kind of help us move forward. So obviously, so we've really utilised Teams, and also we have a applicant tracking system that's linked into our HR system.
Oh, okay.
So that's been a really good way of being able to move hiring managers so that all of the feedback is centralised, all of the applicants that come into us are centralised. So it's made it a really nice kind of slick process that we can still kind of continue that, still having those conversations, and communication has been very key in terms of keeping the process going.
Definitely. And do you see that now things have changed and you've had to adapt some of the processes? Do you see these changes being more in the short term, or are these long-term changes that are going to carry on for you?
So for us, it would be sort of more of a long-term change. We're becoming more virtualised as a business. As Sharon touched upon, a lot of our products and services have obviously moved to online platforms. So obviously we've taken the decision, as not everyone is based within Ely. Anyway, we've got obviously worldwide recruitment and onboarding due to the group. So it's something that we will kind of keep on doing moving forward.
Fantastic. Great. So obviously for many larger businesses, such as yourselves, that there will be processes that were already virtual in place. But for part of the webinar today, we'll be talking about the stage where you're actually implementing the process. So we thought we would start with just sharing some tips that hopefully might help when you're creating the process. So Sharon, did you want to start off with a couple of tips that you could recommend to the listeners?
Okay, I think when you're looking at a process, it's very important to kind of understand what you're doing and what works well with what you're doing, and actually what do you want to change? Why do you want to change it? What the outcome is that you're hoping to achieve by changing it. So very much kind of trying to drill down exactly what do you want to achieve, but also I think thinking about who engages with that process. When we make changes, we think about it, and we have this set up as part of the framework that we work in as a business. So we're very much managed in terms of the ISO 27001 in terms of the controls and processes type thinking. So we think about, okay, who owns a particular process, but actually who needs to be consulted if you were to change that process. So thinking about obviously the recruitment process, HR owns that, and that's very much Millie's baby in terms of making sure that works and owning the elements of it, and making sure if somebody doesn't do what they're meant to be doing, having that conversation. And it's very much about thinking about, right, okay, if you make a change, who's that going to affect, and actually getting some sort of conversation going about, what are your thoughts if we were to do this, and it's really important, that communication piece in terms of helping to design your change so it works, but then making sure that people have bought into that, because obviously any change that you make, you need people to then work with that, otherwise there's no point in making that change. So it is about that, understand what you want to get out of it, what your end goal needs to look like, but making sure you've done enough consultation. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything everyone suggests, but I think if you get some thoughts in the mix, like I say, it helps maybe you to formulate that right outcome, but also gets that buy-in when you're looking for it to be implemented as well.
We've just had a question come through actually, Sharon, that I obviously would be open to yourself or Millie, and it was around how you have helped hiring managers adapt to these virtual processes. Would either of you be able to share some insight on that?
Yeah, so I suppose one of the biggest things is communication, making sure that the hiring managers kind of understand the process and what they need to do as part of that new process. So as part of the recruitment structure anyway, it's having kind of pre-conversations with the hiring managers ahead of the interview to construct things like interview guides, and making sure that they fully understand what they want to get out of the interview. And it's the same with moving it onto sort of the virtual processes. Obviously, it's the same premise as when you're sat across the table from an interviewee. What do you want at the end of that? And kind of just because it's virtual, there is still elements that we can do. We don't feel that we've kind of lost anything by moving to virtual interviewing. But I think it's really for that hiring manager to kind of understand what they want to gain out of the process. So then we can utilise that when we're doing the interviews. So in terms of helping them adapt, I think it's just making sure that they're educated on what the process is, what system you're now following as a business. If you're kind of changing anything quite significant to move online, it's making sure that they understand kind of why you're doing that, what tools, if there's any sort of new tools that they're going to have to use, that they feel comfortable with those as well. Because if you've got hiring managers that perhaps aren't comfortable with using Teams or being on video and things like that, it's having those conversations during the process to be able to get them as prepared as possible, so the interviews can then run as smoothly as possible.
Definitely, no, that's a really good point. Anything else to add in terms of that? I know you mentioned you had an ATS system in place. How has that helped during this time?
It's helped massively. We'd moved a lot of the recruitment process into the system ahead of lockdown anyway, sort of just adapting our process once we'd got the ATS sort of all ready to go. So it's helped with feedback, because obviously it's now a central repository for candidate documents in terms of being able to share CVs with managers. They've got a portal that they can log on, provide feedback when they do the initial screening, but then when we're going through the telephone interview and formal interview, they've then got access to being able to get their CV relatively easily, so they can do any sort of reviewing that they want to before the interview, but also it's a place for them to provide their feedback and sort of the scoring for the candidate after the interview as well. So it means that it's all nicely in one place that they can then access and follow the process through without having to sort of have any perhaps paper documentation as well. It kind of cuts the need out for having to print things out, and it goes back to sort of the GDPR and data protection. It means then that everything's stored securely and they've got access to it on screen.
Very well linked back there, Millie.
Yeah, I'd just reinforce that. I think organisations might find now that they're sharing information in a different way to what they did before. The not being in the office, being in a more virtualised environment, maybe more stuff is being shared over email, and it's very important, if possible, to consolidate where you share your information, purely from the fact of, yes, it's all in one place and easily accessible, but also the fact is it does help much more when it comes to that compliance and making sure that you're not retaining information that you shouldn't be retaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And my notes on this were more around obviously documenting the process, making sure the relevant people have that document, including the hiring managers, and information such as how many stages for each role, who needs to be involved in that, if there's going to be any kind of testing that's going to be happening, benefits, company benefits that is, any kind of information around your values and your mission statement that perhaps would need to be included in that. And also I think a really important part of the process is generally is once they've been created, evaluating them and changing them if you get feedback that means that there's something could be better or streamlined more.
Yeah, I mean, we very much do that as part of our kind of feedback on our kind of process. Once somebody's started, we have a from their start date, normally within a couple of weeks of them starting, we'll actually go to them and say, okay, how have you found your start with us? Because it's really important. I think, people come to your organisation with fresh eyes, and they see things that you don't necessarily see, or they come with different ideas from other organisations. Really important to be able to utilise those ideas to really think about what you do and any changes that might help.
I think that's especially relevant, sort of linking it to the current situation as well. As Sharon said, it's really important to get that feedback, because if you've recently adapted your onboarding process, it's really valuable to know how people thought about it. What do they think they can do better? Did it go really well? Because if you've recently changed a process, you need to know that it is working, it's giving people what they need, and they're getting that good start with you.
And it's also quite nice to recognise some successes as well. You're working really hard to support that recruitment process, that onboarding process, and to actually know that you're doing some really great things is really good, because there's lots of stuff going on that is tough at times, and actually to say, yeah, we're getting some really great feedback on this is a really nice boost sometimes.
Definitely. So if we move on to more of the virtual interviewing side of things, Millie, what kind of preparation would you normally do as the interviewer ahead of a virtual interview?
So I'll touch on kind of our process as well, sort of in this, and that will kind of link in with the preparation that I do for kind of each stage. So as part of our interview process, normally it'll be a two-stage interview process, which consists of a telephone interview, which we use as kind of fact-finding, perhaps looking at gaps in people's CVs, and depending on line manager availability, and if they want to be part of that section, it will be just myself conducting that interview, or it would be the line manager with me also, followed by then a formal interview if they're successful through that initial process. So as part of our role sign-off, one of the areas that we look at initially is what interviewing techniques the hiring manager would like to use as part of that process to assess, obviously, suitable candidates, whether that's a technical test, a presentation, or looking at just kind of a standard question and answer style interview. Because sometimes with roles that's the best way. You don't need to overcomplicate the interview process. If it's just the fact of talking someone through and asking questions, situational questions, that's all you need in an interview. At the end of the day, you want to get to know the person, and you want to put them at ease and make them feel comfortable. So once we've kind of gone through that initial process and we're getting ready for the formal interview, I would obviously contact the candidate and express that obviously this is a video call, so it's covering off with the candidate and making sure that they're prepared in knowing what to expect, how the interview is going to run, what type of interview, is there anything that they need to prepare, and ensuring that you actually give them the time to prepare as well. Because obviously if you're asking them to do a presentation, inviting them to an interview the following day probably isn't gonna be enough time for them to kind of settle their nerves and prepare and give their best at interview. So it's kind of taking into consideration those aspects. If you're asking them to prepare stuff, just make sure that you're then planning the interview with enough time for them. We also, as a business, do interview guides. So it gives the line manager time to kind of think about, well, what questions do they want to ask? What do they want to get out of the interview? What's relevant for the role? How do they want to kind of measure those skills to make sure that at the end of the interview they can say, yep, they're going to be a really good fit and be able to do the job that we need them to do. And that also means that the interviews then stay consistent. So obviously I stress that it is a guide. It's not there as a kind of structure that it needs to kind of then have a regimented interview. Obviously conversations flow, candidates have different experiences. But it's there to kind of have that consistency and make sure you're kind of covering off, so that at the end of an interview you can then compare all of your candidates to see who's most suitable for the job. it's also what I've touched upon there as well, is making sure that line managers kind of understand what they want to get out of the interview. As I say, it's not just about skills, it's about finding the right team fit, the right person for the role, and making sure it aligns with actually what the candidate wants to do as well, in terms of sort of their progression, way they see their career going, and what can be offered. And then I suppose touching back just on the candidate side, if you are obviously then moving to solely virtual interviews, it's making sure that the candidate can actually access the interview. So providing them a link ahead of time, such as a Teams meeting, those obviously can be tested ahead of the interview. So it's making sure that you provide them with something that they know that a couple of days before they can go on, test, make sure that their sound and video and everything works, so that when they join the interview, they're kind of fully prepared and not stressing about any technical issues sort of before the interview.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think, yeah, again, I just add to that about in preparation of the interview, really setting the tone and expectation of how the interview will go. So how many stages you're looking at, and whether this stage is an informal or more formal process, but also thinking about things like how are you going to get across the company culture virtually, which I think we'll come on to again a little bit later. One of the things that often happens when things are virtual or telephone based is something as simple as who's going to initiate the call on a telephone interview. So really thinking about having a template that you can recycle, obviously, but really over communicating, more information the better, so the candidates are as prepared as possible. Okay, so we are now moving on to virtual onboarding. Sharon, did you want to talk to us a bit about the process for onboarding?
Millie, do you want to cover this? Because this is something that you kind of primarily look after.
Yeah, so in terms of the process, so kind of as I covered off at the beginning, we've really just adapted our existing processes. We used to conduct certain onboarding virtually anyway, such as obviously the US. So in terms of our process, once the employees obviously been successful through the recruitment process, we would prepare obviously all of their documentation. We use a program called DocuSign, which means that we can actually send all of the documents, handbook, offer letter, to be signed by the employee securely, but virtually. So there's no posting of documentations. Obviously it means that nothing can get lost in the post. They can log on and sign. We can provide them all of the information of their contract, and they get a virtual copy, obviously, once it's been signed by all parties as well. So once that's kind of been completed, we really get into how we're going to onboard the candidate, what's useful for their role. So it would be speaking to their line manager in terms of who are the key people in the business that are going to be related to their role, that's really going to help them, for them to understand what they do in the business and how that links in with their new role. We complete a full HR induction, of an introduction into the company, policies, procedures, group structure, for them to kind of really understand about us without giving them too much information, because obviously you appreciate it's their first kind of 2 weeks that we mainly look after, and then they fit nicely into the business and can kind of hit the ground running. So it's not giving them information overload, because it's not going to be helpful to them. So I'll work with the line managers in terms of conducting and pulling together an induction schedule that will then get provided to the candidate on their first day, and really kind of give them that structure through what to expect, who they're going to be meeting, what those roles entail. Part of the adaptation is obviously sending out equipment, so it's liaising with the relevant departments to make sure that they've got everything that they need equipment-wise on their first day. Obviously, we want to make sure that as part of their IT induction, they've got a laptop or computer and screens that they can actually log into to access their induction. We speak to the employee sort of on a regular basis building up to their first day, so they've got communication, they're already starting to get to know the HR and IT teams within the business, and giving them that really warm welcome, as well as a welcome email that details for them kind of what to expect and setting out a few kind of different areas for them to be aware of in terms of their first day. So it's a lot of the process is around communication and making sure that they have everything that they need. I think a key element as well is making sure that they're added into any staff briefings, team meetings, to make sure that they kind of are really included in everything from their first day.
And I would really reinforce the communication side of things, particularly now when we're doing things more virtually. You know, that new starter needs to have that kit on that first day. They can't just like they necessarily would come into the office and be able to kind of use somebody else's machine or have something ad hoc. This is very much like that kit needs to be with them so that they can see people, they can talk to people on that first day, they can start building that connection with their role, their immediate team, their manager. So, you know, that real importance of making sure that everything has gone on behind the scenes to get that happening, really, really important. And that's really about teams within the business working together as much as they can to prepare for that new start, and recognizing that even more so now it's really important because that person's, they're seeing their interaction with you on a virtual basis now. They're not necessarily seeing that there's a whole team of people working to support them in the office. They're just seeing necessarily an email or a phone call if they haven't got, you know, that kit that's got the webcam on, that they are not able to see their own mailbox. And I think, you know, it is about just making sure, like Millie said, the staff briefings. For us, we have since lockdown implemented a daily staff briefing with our CEO. So basically he talks to the business every day. You know, at 9:30 we log on and he's given us an update on what's happening in the business or what's happening in the wider world that could affect us individually and as a business. And for a new starter to be able to see that, that's a really key thing about them understanding us as a business, our culture, what they're now part of. So, you know, don't underestimate the importance of things like briefings, of that interaction, even just on a one-to-one level with colleagues. It's all really important to help people feel part of the business and feel they've made the right choice in being part of your company.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you mentioned the daily briefings to me last week, that's fantastic, and I'm sure it's very encouraging for all of your employees to have that. So yeah.
Massively so. We've had a phenomenal amount of feedback on how people, particularly at this uncertain time, you know, been and still going through a huge amount of change, and actually to hear from our chief exec on a daily basis. But I think it's also brought us together as a company. It's made us realise more about how we all work together, improved our communication overall. I think teams communicate hugely better, they have more kind of personal and work interaction. But as a business, you know, across the group companies as well, because, you know, it can be a case of the group companies all thinking about themselves individually. They've actually started working together more, communicating, realizing that they're all part of a bigger picture. So there are some real benefits in terms of this virtualization, because you can bring so many more people together. It's not about how many people you can fit in a room anymore.
Yep. Just on that, I've just seen a question pop up in terms of sort of how long do the briefing meetings last. So for us in the morning, they're just 15 minutes. So it doesn't have to be anything sort of particularly long, but as Sharon said, it kind of has brought the group together.
So, I mean, Alan will kind of have certain things that he will touch on. On Friday, it's kind of who gets a sort of shout out in terms of what they've done on social media or some really great recognition within the business. A really nice opportunity to kind of flag up who's doing some really great stuff, but also keeps us in touch with kind of the products and services and the challenges we're facing as well. So there's some real great value.
Yeah, and I know your marketing team have been doing a fantastic job in terms of getting some infographics out around usage and course information and how many people have taken that. So that's fantastic and good for them. It looks great. So moving on, obviously we've touched on quite a lot of positives there for onboarding, but one of the ones that obviously we all are now aware of is we have massive access to a wider talent pool, with most companies moving to remote working in the long term, which is fantastic. Obviously the process is very streamlined and structured, and possibly less nerves for the candidate because they haven't got to worry about, you know, being late, the journey, getting there. Do you feel that from the candidates that you've spoke to around this?
Yeah, so I've found that it's actually been a real positive in that sense, because it is a more relaxed environment in terms of interviewing someone virtually. Like you said, it's not being late. They don't have to go to a new place. They're in their kind of safe space of being in their own home. And I think it's also the fact is that we're all sat in our houses as well. You communicate on such a different level now than I think you would in a business, from sitting across from someone. And it's obviously that you get the basics of what you want to get out of an interview, but I think you get so much more in terms of that candidate actually opening up, and you being able to engage with them as well, because they are more relaxed. They're opening up to you. They're opening their home up to you as well, and likewise for you. So I think you do get a lot more out of it, and it takes away some of that. I think me and Sharon were speaking about this yesterday, in terms of when you meet a candidate and you have like a handshake with someone, and some people have obviously been known that you would judge someone on their handshake, but it takes that kind of unconscious bias out of it, because you're seeing the person, you're getting to know their personality and how they come across, and that's the most important thing for us out of an interview is the person, their experience, their personality, how they come across, and that's what you're employing.
Yeah.
So.
And particularly if, as a business, you are operating more virtually, actually to interview somebody on a virtual basis, when that's potentially how you're going to be working with them going forward, really great indicator even as to actually how responsive they're going to be when that manager's trying to have those calls with them to talk about their day-to-day, to be part of a team as part of, you know, group calls. So I think, you know, there's some really great benefits actually of the kind of the virtualized environment and interviewing that way.
Absolutely, yeah. So do you foresee any negatives? Have you experienced any negatives so far in terms of feedback from yourselves, hiring managers, or candidates?
No, not so far. Everyone's sort of had a really positive experience. People that we've interviewed, obviously the feedback that we've got through sort of agencies that we've used for sort of more technical roles, the feedback has all been really positive, and a lot of it has been in terms of the people that they're meeting, in terms of the hiring managers, and obviously we've you are, like I say, communicating now on a different level. So I think it's those. There isn't for us any necessarily cons or anything that has been a detriment to us moving sort of solely video interviewing at the moment.
I think it has helped the fact that we have adapted as an organisation to that virtual environment. For me personally, I was very much, you know, a face-to-face person, being in meetings where you were all in the same room, and felt much more comfortable with that as a way of working, you know, that very much being able to pick up on those kind of cues of, you know, how people react to things. And my thought of like going into this sort of virtual environment where you just didn't have that, I was kind of like, okay, this is going to be a bit weird. But it's actually quite interesting once you start working that way and everybody else is doing it, how easily you actually become really comfortable with it, and it just becomes second nature. So I think, you know, the more that you do this, the more that you talk to people in front of a camera, the more it is something that you just do as part of your day-to-day, and people shouldn't be afraid to do that. You know, I think for a lot of organizations possibly it is going to be very new, but it's like, try it, actually it's okay, and actually it works really well. And I think, you know, there's some real benefits, like we've discussed, from doing that.
Absolutely. I think one of the things is, of course, when you're holding an interview and the person is seeing you in your home, obviously it's important there to get across about the company culture. It's important to get across if you was to return to the office at a later stage, what that team looks like, how potentially how the office is set out. I wouldn't necessarily see it as a negative in terms of that, but it's just, I think it's important to tell people about those things at that stage. So if they do go back to the office at a later point, those things are not a problem or an obstacle.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Hayley. And we've very much taken the approach of the open communication. You know, really talking about where we're at as a business. We have our business continuity committee that meets twice a week. So we're very much thinking about, okay, what's our next step in terms of the business going back to a kind of a more of a perhaps a normal state or the new normal? What things do we need to think about? And very much as part of kind of the briefings in the morning, Alan's able to share, right, okay, this is now what we're thinking about. But also, you know, from an HR team perspective, talking to employees that might have concerns about returning to the office, and, you know, really helping them to understand that we're not wanting them to go into an environment that they're not comfortable with, and we're taking on board their concerns, and it's very much trying to take it at people's pace. But then when we're saying, right, okay, the potentially the office is going to open, this is what it's going to look like, and letting people kind of have a view as to whether that's right for them or not. So again, it drills back to that communication, being open, talking to people about what the situation going forward is going to look like, and taking on board their feedback, and understanding if somebody is nervous about taking that next step, and helping them, guide them through it.
Okay, ladies, we have a couple of questions. Hi, Tom. Thanks for your question. So Tom asks, how do you ensure you get the best out of a nervous candidate virtually? And how do you support those that aren't the most technically adept?
So I suppose the first part of the question is how do you get the best out of a nervous candidate? It's all about picking up on those kind of cues as to when you do see a candidate that might be a bit nervous or not perhaps giving you as much as you feel that they have to give. And it's just about making them feel a bit more comfortable. I mean, we do a introduction at the start of the interview. So we'll kind of go around and introduce who's on the call, give an update about the company and kind of the interview structure, and very much stress that it's not something that's, we don't want them to feel harassed by questions, because you're not going to get the most out of someone in that way. So it's kind of adapting to that person of how are you going to get the most out of them. So if it's through kind of asking your questions in a more conversational style, then having that, and don't be afraid to show your personality and kind of say to them, look, we're all here just to kind of have a chat, get the best out of you, see obviously if this works. So it's adapting your style, and perhaps making, if someone is feeling nervous, just kind of take away a bit of that structure and formality to make it flow. And makes them just feel more settled. You're still going to get the same out of an interview in terms of the areas that you need to cover, which is why the interview guide is kind of a good place, because you're still then making notes and covering off the areas that you need to get, but adapting how you cover those areas to suit the candidate.
I think you can just add a little bit of small talk in there, can't you, Millie? Just to kind of just sort of ease the candidate into the conversation as well.
I think that's the nice thing about being from home is I've had, obviously during interviews, my dog decides that he wants to take a drink out of his bowl, which can be picked up by my laptop microphone. But it's a little conversation that makes everyone chuckle and kind of just almost just breaks the ice. And I think that's a nice thing about people being in their homes, is they are more relaxed, and those little things that actually you might get interrupted by a child, but that's okay, because we're all in the same situation, and it is just, that's the norm. So
yeah, I think just to add to that, I love talking to candidates about the interests that they've put on their CV, because I feel that when they do that, they kind of relax, and you can really see their passion. So that's always sometimes a good conversation starter if you can sense that there is some nerves there. But just generally anyway, I think that it's quite interesting to see someone's different hobbies.
Yeah, and I think it's also looking at your interview process as well, as making sure that if you've got a telephone interview and say a formal interview, that actually a telephone interview isn't going to suit everyone. So it's knowing as well, when you're kind of getting something from a candidate, but say perhaps in a telephone interview they aren't as confident, or you can't see those social cues. So it's also kind of adapting your process to go, actually they didn't perform that well potential in telephone interview, but there's something you want to explore further, and then you get so much more out of them in a formal interview, because that's the style that works better for them. So it's just kind of picking up on those kind of elements in terms of candidates.
So in answer to that second part of Tom's question, supporting those that aren't the most technically adept. Would you say that for most cases, if you had a response where someone wasn't able to access the platform or had a query in terms of downloading a new app, would you do those via telephone and they would equally go to offer stage? Or
so we're quite lucky. I mean, touch wood, I haven't had anyone who's, without a bit of sort of talking through, not been able to kind of access and do it in that way. Of course, we would adapt if someone had a real issue that they couldn't, then we'd work a way around it. Obviously, we still would like to meet people, because that's very important for them as well. They need to meet the person and the people they're going to be working with. So it would be looking at, actually, in the situation we are now, can we perhaps do a socially distanced interview or something like that? So I think it's kind of adapting to the candidates and what they're comfortable with. In terms of kind of the technology side, this is why I think it's really important to be able to send the link out ahead of the interview and giving them a couple of days to say, look, you can test this before the interview. Let me know if you've got any issues. And it's being able to provide them almost with a little bit of technical support, because, yeah, not everyone may feel comfortable with the platform that you're using either. They may have used other things like Zoom, but they may have not accessed Teams before. So it's making it as simple as possible. I provide them with one link that they click on and it takes them through to a web browser. So it's easy for me to then be able to talk them through if they're a little unsure about something. But just make sure, obviously, that you give them the time to be able to sort any of those issues out before the interview, so it's not during the time that you've allotted to actually conduct the interview.
Yeah, and similarly, Katie, hi Katie, is asking about if there's ever been a candidate who has had an issue with a virtual interview or unable to use the technology to do it. I think we've kind of covered that off nicely there. I think there are ways around it, and there's going to have to be a way around it if that is coming up as a problem moving forward. And hopefully, as time moves on, we can get to a point where obviously face-to-face interviews may resume, but with different arrangements to normal. Or the old normal.
Yeah, the old norm.
So to summarise, Sharon, I just wanted to come over to you to sort of bring this to the end. Just summarising your thoughts in terms of how you found today, the webinar, and also your thoughts on the topics we've covered.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of today is very much, it's good to focus on something like recruitment and bringing on board, because now businesses, they need to think about their people and who they bring in. And that's really important, because the people are really the core of the business. And it's about, you know, you still need to recruit the right people. You still need to have those right people in your business, and for those people to have the information they need to do their jobs. So, you know, very much kind of, you know, where you've got processes for recruiting, how you can adapt those to make those work for the current environment. And I don't think changes necessarily need to be massive. Think about the things that work well, and are there some tweaks that you need to do to those to make them work for now. But also think about, you know, that onboarding and that process overall. You know, you are sharing information within the business. Are you doing that in a different way? Think about, obviously, from your compliance, your processes, your policies and procedures. So, you know, it is important to obviously keep certain principles at heart, even when you're in a period of change. But also, another thing is, and I don't think we've necessarily touched on this too much, is about that kind of that training that you have as part of your induction, that bringing people on board, staff awareness courses. For us, it's very much something that, you know, we've done for many years, because that is part of what we do as a business. But, you know, e-learning, using the virtualized platforms, educating your staff on a virtual basis when they haven't necessarily got their colleagues around them to tell them about, you know, watch out for phishing emails, or watch out, you know, for scams, or to understand GDPR. There's lots of things, you know, as an organisation that we do to help educate our staff as part of our induction programme. So keep that really important as well. Make sure you keep making sure that your new starters have got all the information they need, and if you can do that on a virtualized basis, that's great. You know, there's some great ways to do that. I think also, you know, remote working and virtualization, we shouldn't be afraid of it. You know, it's very much a change that we've embraced as an organization, and I think there's huge benefits that have come from that. But also, when you're looking at recruiting people into your business, make sure that you explain to them the changes that you've gone through in terms of any changes. Like for us, the fact that, you know, most of our staff are going to be predominantly home-based, to make sure that's something that actually works for them, because a lot of people haven't necessarily worked from home. We've obviously all kind of been thrown into it and we've worked really well, but it might not be actually something somebody wants to do. So make sure they understand the change that you've been through recently, or you're going to be going through, so that they can make a judgment as to actually, is that right for them?
Absolutely. Just to touch on the awareness courses, we offer the GDPR e-learning course, staff awareness course, and also the information security course as part of our onboarding process. So having done them, I can see definitely the value in them, and how they've given all of our employees a general overview of those practices, but without it being too legislative or
We've had huge interest. I had something from our marketing team that basically said 458 people have booked our training courses since lockdown. Wow. So organisations are really keen for their staff to be up to date on lots of the security, understanding the risk side of things for their businesses. So there's a real demand out there. And e-learning courses specifically, 8,700 users have accessed our e-learning courses since lockdown.
Fantastic.
So it's high on the agenda for a lot of businesses.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, ladies. I thought to finish, we could perhaps just each do a top takeaway. So something for people to really be thinking about as they leave the webinar shortly. Millie, can I start with you?
Yeah, of course. So I think my top takeaway would be as part of your interview process and onboarding process, sort of really get the business culture across. It's really important that people sort of know what they're coming into, and it's communicated really well to them. The whole process, from the recruitment, the time before they actually start with you, and sort of the initial start and the onboarding process that you have, just make sure that you're really communicating. I think along with that, personality is key, making sure that they're getting to know you as individuals within the business, because as Sharon said, it's the people that make a business, and as people go through all of those processes, they're going to get to know a lot of people, and it's making sure that you're not necessarily too formalized, that there is that approach of you're getting everything that you want across them so that they can hit the ground running. They're going to have a really warm start with you and be provided with everything they need throughout those two processes.
Fantastic. Thanks, Millie. And over to you, Sharon.
Thanks. I think for me, it's probably a bit more of a broader sort of look, and not necessarily just related to kind of recruitment and onboarding, but I think it's kind of what underpins it, and it's thinking about obviously what you do well, what has worked well for you, and what you do need to change. But thinking about making sure that those changes are still right for you as a business. You're still achieving what you need to do. It's still, you know, sharing with the candidate how you work as a business, what's important to you, and don't be afraid of making changes. And sometimes it's the simplest changes that you can make to a process, or how you communicate, or what you share with people, that actually has the biggest impact. So it doesn't necessarily have to be massive and grand, but it's about kind of keeping what's important at heart and not being afraid to make some changes.
Yeah, really good point. And I think mine would be around having a page on your website which perhaps leans towards explaining more about the culture, the benefits, the type of company that you are, any social activities you do. I mean, all of these things, if you are wanting to interview the candidate, it implies that there is a possibility they'll become an employee. So you want them to have the best impression of your company right from the get-go. And in addition to that, I think it's also about, maybe a way forward is a virtual video, which would go into that kind of messaging, but in a video format, going down the virtual route. So I don't know whether that might become more popular as time goes on. But I think that the other thing that I wanted to close with was the importance of having this template that really does set the tone and expectation with your candidate in terms of timeframes and stages, who's going to be involved, what's going to happen next, who's going to make the call, who's going to start the, all of that encapsulated into one email.
And I think that's it, isn't it? That communication, whether you're all in the same space or whether you're all virtual, is still really important, even more important now. I think that's something that we need to obviously keep at the heart of what we do.
So thank you so much. I hope you have all found this useful and that you've got some takeaways that you'll be focusing on. Does anybody have any more questions? We'll just wait to see if there's any more come through before we close off the session. Just in case anyone's typing, I will hang on.
No pressure.
No. Okay, I will take that as a no then.